These 6 edible plants that I'm going to share today are not only going to provide a ton of food for you to survive off, but they themselves are also survivors. Survival crops is a popular topic here on YouTube, but most of them are annuals and they take a lot of time and effort to plant, keep alive, and then you need to make sure you're preserving them because most likely they're going to be all ready at once. However, these 6 survival crops are vigorous growing perennials, so you basically have to do nothing except harvest them and eat them. Alright, so let's go take a look at the first one. Alright, so this sea of green here is a few different things, but one of them is New Zealand spinach or Warrigal greens. So this is an edible ground cover and it grows vigorously and so quickly. It's almost hard to keep on top of. It is a powerhouse producer, and unlike most spinaches, it actually grows quite well during summer, during the warmer months, when most of our leafy greens in our spinaches are wilting and dying. This is surviving. So I use this just like I do any other spinach, chopped up in a stir fry, in a curry, in a soup, all the things, and the stems are edible, flowers, the whole thing. So I like to use the young stems and I'm continuously pruning them so that I can manage my garden beds, keep it under control and get a whole lot of food. The great thing about the spinach is that for me it grows all year round, but in some climates it will die back. But it does produce lots of little flowers that turn into seed pods, and those fall down into the soil and regrow when the time is right. So these are all self-sown seeds. These are hollyhock, and these ones here are the New Zealand spinach or Warrigal greens popping up. So I've been moving those to different parts of my garden. So that means you get a continuous supply of New Zealand spinach or Warrigal greens popping up in the garden bed, and you can also move those and repopulate them in other areas of your garden. So that is something that I'm going to do as well. So this plant here is the Queensland arrowroot or the Canna Edulis. It's an edible type of canna, but it is not the same as the ornamental canna. So it produces rhizomes under the ground that are edible, and the young shoots and leaves are also edible as well. The rhizomes can be used as a substitute for potato, and I've been using it a lot in curries and soups, and I've recently made some crispy potato chips which were really delicious. So the great thing about the edible canna is that it produces really quickly and it grows in a wide range of conditions. I have it growing in shade here as a middle layer in my food forest style garden, and it also provides a whole lot of greens and leaf matter to use as chop and drop or composting. And I think that's really crucial when we talk about survival crops or about survival gardens, is being able to produce soil as well and having excess organic matter to do that, because soil is the absolute key to a healthy garden, and that is what is going to help the rest of our crops thrive and produce food. So this plant produces more and more plants by a clumping method, so you can break off certain parts and move it around the garden, and that is what I've been doing recently, creating more little patches throughout the garden, getting a whole lot of plants for free and establishing more food, more organic matter and more diversity in the garden. So this next plant is also an amazing producer. It provides greens as well to feed and nourish our gardens and our soil, and it also continuously produces new plants, so you never have to buy another one again. Once you have this established in your garden, you're continuously getting more and more free plants and free food. And that is the banana. So bananas produce a whole lot of food. It produces little pups or side shoots off the main plant that you can actually remove and put in other areas of your garden to establish more banana patches. But once the bananas are ready to be picked, then the plant dies off. So you can cut it down and use that as mulch, or use that to create compost to feed the upcoming bananas, so you get more and more food. Speaking of chop and drop, there's one thing that I wanted to share with you quickly before we jump into the next 3 survival crops, one of which is my absolute favorite. It's really important that you have really high quality tools that are sharp. So I wanted to thank today's sponsor of the video, which is Hoselink. Hoselink is a company that I have been using for, I don't know, over 5 years now, and I love their products. They not only have really good hose reels and hose products, but also a lot of gardening tools. So some of the main ones that I use all the time, every single day in my garden, are secateurs or the cutters, and I use these pretty much for everything, for harvesting, for pruning, for cutting things back. Anything that's not too large I can cut with. And I also have a sharpener, because it's really important that you keep your tools nice and sharp, because when you are taking cuttings to reproduce plants or to even cut back or harvest anything, you want to make sure that you're making clean, sharp cuts, because you don't want to squish the plant. If you're just ripping parts off, then you're going to cause excess damage that's going to make the plant spend more energy fixing those wounds than if it was a nice clean cut. So for things that are a little bit larger, like a lot of these fruit trees are now getting too large for me to be cutting back with secateurs, I have these loppers. So these cut the larger branches really easily, and I can reach up and do it quickly and without hardly any effort. And because I like to plant so densely in my garden, it is important that I get in there and prune things back every now and then to make sure there's enough light for the things down below, or that it's not interfering and damaging other plants. Like this large mulberry, I'm constantly cutting down because it is whipping and smacking into other plants, and also there's no way I'm harvesting fruit way up there, so I do cut that back all the time, especially now in autumn. It's a really good time to be pruning your mulberry, autumn and winter, and taking lots of cuttings to produce new food or more food for my garden. So there's a link in the description if you want to check out the range of cutting tools or hoses and hose reels. They also have a lot of solar lights as well. Now let's take a look at my favorite survival crop in the garden. Alright, so let's talk about sweet potato. This is a powerhouse edible plant for so many different reasons, but one of the things I love the most about the sweet potato is that it's a multi-use crop. So it produces a whole lot of greens that we can use as a substitute for spinach and soups and curries, all the things, whilst it's producing edible roots under the ground. So it produces a whole lot of food over the course of its growing season, and in some areas like here in Perth, it will grow all year round. Another thing that I love about the sweet potato is that it's an edible ground cover. It grows really lush and protects the soil, but you can also grow it vertically. So you can see in this garden bed I have it growing as an edible ground cover, but also I have it climbing up the fence to grow vertically. So if you are limited on space, then you can grow sweet potato vertically in a container as well. One thing is that this plant is vigorous growing, and it will grow back each year without you having to do anything. So that is something to consider when you are deciding where to plant sweet potato, is that it's probably going to grow back each year, and it is such a thick, vigorous growing plant that it does smother out everything, weeds included, which is great. So if you use it to your advantage, you can smother out the weeds, you can get multiple crops from it, from the greens, from the sweet potatoes, but it can go a little bit wild, so that is something to consider as well. And that's one of the things about these plants, is that they are survivors, that they are thriving on neglect, that they are going to have a bit of a weed-like growth. Any tiny little piece of root left behind in the soil is going to regrow next year, which is the main reason I love it, because I get free food and I don't have to do anything. Another edible plant that I have growing in my raised garden beds and my food forest style gardens is the Egyptian walking onion. This is an onion, and it is so incredible because it reproduces all by itself, and it sort of walks around the garden. So it produces bulbs under the soil just like an onion, but then also on the top of it, it produces little bulbs that when they get heavy, they fall down, touch the soil, and they will regrow from there. So it slowly walks around the garden, and onions are a really good staple based crop to have to add flavour to your meals, and also the whole plant is edible. Because they are a perennial onion, they're going to regrow each year without you having to do anything, so you're constantly going to get a supply of onions. Alright, so next up we have papaya. So papaya is something that I love growing because it grows really fast and you can get fruit off it within the first year. Another thing that is really unique about the papaya is you can eat the fruit ripe or unripe, so you can get crops of it throughout the growing period or throughout the ripening period. It's a really versatile plant to have in the garden. So ripe papaya are really sweet and juicy, and they make delicious breakfast fruits. I love eating papaya for breakfast. It's so juicy. And then the unripe papayas are more of a vegetable substitute, so you can use those raw or cooked. I love using raw papaya grated in a salad. It absorbs so much of the flavour of dressings and marinades, and you can also use it cooked in curries and stir fries, soups. So it's a really versatile thing to have in the garden. And apparently you can eat the seeds as well. They're sort of like a peppercorn substitute. But I haven't tried that, so we'll have to give it a go. Another thing that's amazing about the papaya is that every single fruit, if you let it to go ripe, will have hundreds of seeds inside. So you can easily grow hundreds more papaya plants from a single fruit, and they do germinate really easily. Mainly in these warmer climates like we've got here in Perth, any subtropical, tropical, or if you've got a greenhouse at home, you can try giving it a go in there. You can also preserve papaya really easily. You can freeze it for smoothies, or dehydrated papaya is so good. It's like a sweet lolly treat, but all natural. Alright, so now we've got our papaya seeds. Let's make some little eco pots to plant the seeds using some of the leaves from the Canna or the Queensland arrowroot. You can also use banana leaves for this as well, but I have lots of these Canna leaves at the moment, so I'm going to use those. So to make these eco pots, I'm just slicing down the center of the leaf to create two separate sides, and if you were using banana leaves, you would just cut these into rectangle pieces to use to make the pots. The center piece is what I'm going to use to secure the pot. Alright, so we just roll it into a little pot shape, and then use the center part to secure the pot. Just cut the ends off. And all the extra back into the garden. Now I've got 3 little eco pots to fill up with soil. And then because these pots don't have a bottom, I pop these on a tray and then I fill them up with potting mix or soil to plant the seeds. And I'll keep them on this tray until they're ready to go into the garden. And I like to water my seedlings from the bottom, from a tray anyway, so this works out perfectly. So I popped some water in here with the seeds, and the ones that sink to the bottom are going to be the most likely to be viable. So not only are we getting food from these plants, from the banana and the Queensland arrowroot, we're also getting a lot of green material to mulch and turn into compost, healthy soil, and we can also make little pots. And once the seeds are ready to go into the garden, you can just pop the whole thing in the garden and you don't even need to transplant it. Let me know in the comments what your survival crops are that are survivors, that are hard to kill and produce a lot of food, and we can create a little bit of a list going of these crops so we can survive off our garden.